All right, welcome back to another episode of the Pressing Forward podcast. On today's episode, we have a special guest and an interesting topic. I think one that affects many people. I think just in relationships, whether it's friendships, relationships, and that is setting boundaries. And on today's guest is Latiesha Wiggins. And I'm going to allow you to, give a quick synopsis on who you are, let the people know who you are, credentials, background, all of that. So.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Latiesha Wiggins at Tisha Talk on Instagram. I'm a mental health counselor, substance use counselor, and executive director of a mental health agency. I work mostly with BIPOC clients with childhood trauma, and I do a lot of work with boundary setting and emotional communication.
Okay. So I mean, you guys heard it. You guys heard it. She's done the works, and so today's topic. Let's dive into that. So what does setting boundaries actually mean? What does that mean?
It's your stipulations you have for yourself to keep yourself safe. Essentially, it's how you communicate what helps you be well. So, depending on the culture you're from, some people might even say it's difficult because it's looked at as being rude or um, having rules or putting up barriers. However, boundaries are not barriers. So let's just say that they should not look like barriers or feel like barriers. It should look like something you do to maintain your peace.
And I think that's interesting too, because I think one of the things you just mentioned is depending on your culture, it might come off as you being, stuck off or, having a certain way about yourself. How do people actually go about setting boundaries?
I would say pay attention to how you feel when you're in the presence of other people or when certain things happen. For example, some people have boundaries about the tone someone takes with them
Mm.
or how loud someone speaks or somebody being dishonest or untruthful. And the first thing I ask is, why is that a boundary for you? And you have to be able to explain how that makes you feel and essentially how is that not good for your mental wellness. So that is a large part of setting boundaries is knowing yourself first of all, and that can be tough. It sounds simple, but a lot of people with the work I do, we struggle with emotional intelligence. So we have trouble understanding what we feel and communicating to other people what we feel. So that is a recipe for disaster because if I can't tell you how I feel and I can't tell you how what you do affects me, how can I set a boundary?
Mm.
So there's a lot of boundary crossing until we learn how to appropriately set boundaries.
I think that's important. One of the things you mentioned there was knowing yourself. And I think that comes with a lot of introspective work, doing the work on your own to really understand yourself. How much of, because even just hearing that, how much of our upbringing and how much of our, I guess, culturally upbringing, how does that play into like our triggers?
It's the recipe, it's the foundation. Um, if you are able to look back honestly um, as an adult, because a lot of times as we developed, our perception changes.
Right.
So the way we see things as a child is going to be different than the way we see it as an adult, specifically over the age of 25, right? Because the frontal is not fully developed until after 25. So a lot of times what happens is when we become an adult, we see things in a different way. So we start to look at who was in the home. How do we learn how to deal with conflict? Maybe as a child, we thought everything was perfect, but as we mature, we start to see different things that affect us. So it's very important to understand your culture, how your culture deals with different mental health issues, and what was going on as you were developing, because that is your recipe. And if you don't get that part right, you'll often fall into patterns and you might not understand why I keep doing these unhelpful things. I just want to, a lot of people say, I just want to be happy. I just want to do better. But essentially, they haven't been able to look at how they came here. Like, how did you pick up these patterns? They don't just come from out of nowhere. So culture, childhood, and just basic, how your basic needs were met is going to have a lot to do about how you see boundary setting and what you feel like you deserve.
Mm, I like that. And so say I sit down with a therapist. Where do I go from there? In terms of I do the work in terms of knowing myself, and now I want to implement, boundaries in my relationships. I have a romantic relationships. How do I go about doing so?
Um, Depending on what type of therapist you have, once you feel like you've reached the goal to where you are able to set boundaries, you go live and you learn your patterns. So first of all, when you're setting boundaries, you learn what are some unhelpful patterns that
Mm.
you might fall into that will that that you notice is affecting your mental wellness.
Could I call those red flags? Is that a
Yeah,
red flag?
yeah,
They
red
term it red
flags.
flag?
Yeah.
Okay, got you.
And let me add in there green flags too. We don't
Okay,
give green flags enough props.
I
Look
don't.
at what makes you happy too. Pay attention to when you feel good. Pay attention to that too, but pay attention to the red flags. And once you say, okay, I know how to set boundaries, I looked at my childhood, I've looked at some of the areas that I need help in, go live. Go live, but pay attention. Pay attention to those patterns you fall back into. Pay attention to when you don't feel good. Pay attention to the people who you're around. And now the good part is when you have to reinforce those boundaries. So it's easy to say, I've set my boundaries, y'all. I'm not dealing with anyone who lies to me. I'm not dealing with anyone who disrespects me. Great. So what happens when somebody does that?
Mm.
What happens is you got to make sure you have those consequences to reinforce the boundaries. So what happens when someone crosses your boundaries?
Right.
That tends to be the hard part.
And that's important that you said that, because I feel like most of the times when you set boundaries, somebody's gonna come to step on those boundaries, and you have to be able to, I
Yeah.
guess, reinforce those boundaries in order for them to actually be termed boundaries.
Yeah.
And how do I know if, like you said, one of the things you mentioned was having a trigger, but how do I know when a certain boundary is not being respected?
You won't feel well.
Mm.
You're gonna notice, especially like you said, if it's a trigger for you, you'll instantly feel it.
Mm.
When we talk about emotional regulation, I do a lot of work with people in helping them understand what happens when you're triggered, how you feel in your body, not just your thoughts, but how do you feel in your body? Are you tensing up? Are you feeling just not well? Are you stuck in your words? Are your feelings hurt? Are you upset? You'll know when someone crosses your boundary, typically is when your body will react.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a somatic feeling. You'll feel it essentially on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what about, because I'm thinking about just off top, if you were to grow up in a household where you have say like a manipulative parent or whatever the case may be, how do you go about that? Because I think that's usually a hard thing for people, is like having a parent that is able to, in a way, manipulate them and almost gaslight them for having that boundary.
Mhm.
Where do they go with that?
I would say generally, if you do the work to go back to see where the areas of need you have, whether it's having a manipulative parent, whether it's you were in a neglectful household, whether you were abused, whether you had an emotional disconnect, whatever the need you had, you have to be clear on how not having that need has affected you, right? So let's say you had an emotionally manipulative parent, which made you feel like you were never good enough.
Right.
And you did the work, you went to therapy, and you noticed that you have a pattern of people pleasing because your parent never made you feel like you were good enough. You fell into the pattern of trying to please and making all of these decisions that have affected your life.
Yeah.
When you set boundaries, you want to make sure that it's fulfilling that need you have so you can prevent those decisions. You want to break that pattern. So a large part of that is understanding what the need is. Not getting stuck in, oh my gosh, I keep yes, my parent was manipulative and this is just the way I am. No, don't get stuck there. Understand you have a need that needs to be met in order to break this pattern, and you can get better. But when you're triggered, instead of falling into that pattern, understand why you're setting that boundary. So maybe you decided you won't try to save everyone. So if someone wants to borrow money, instead of just saying, yeah, you'll give yourself a day to think about it, because you don't want to fall into that pattern of pleasing people and trying to save people. It's ongoing, and it's not a fix. I really want people to understand maintaining mental wellness and mental health is maintenance, it's management, and everyone should be doing something to manage. So these boundary settings and breaking patterns, it requires work.
So understanding, first of all, it's understanding the need, and then
Yep.
understanding the work that has to be done. How
Right.
much of that on a personal level is on the person to not only, shape the people that they surround themselves with. Um, how do you feel like that plays into it? The people that you surround yourself with, in terms of like keeping those boundaries.
I would say your boundaries are yours. They're all yours. It's a one man party when you're setting the boundaries and reinforcing them. Now, the people around you in an ideal world should respect those boundaries, right? But remember, we're all a work in progress. So again, like you said before, someone might try you, or someone might misinterpret. They might misinterpret what your boundary is. Things happen, right? So your boundaries are your responsibility. So you wouldn't necessarily shape the people around you. You make a statement and you model for them how to treat you. Now, they might try to cross, then you reinforce your boundaries. You might have to say it 2 or 3 times, and you might have to figure out what the consequences are. But at the end of the day, your boundaries are yours. You set them, you maintain them. You might change them up over time as you live life, and that is your choice, but it is all your responsibility.
I think that's so important too, just listening, because one of the things I've noticed is like the attitude and the way you go about carrying yourself is how people are gonna react to you. So essentially, like you said, you got to be the one to set the tone for how you want to be spoken to, how you want to be dealt with, things like that. Um, and so if I was entering, say, like a new relationship, is boundaries something I should enforce right away, or should I, let the flow go with the flow, as they like to say?
I really like this question. And I would say, I would hope we would get to a place where we all have boundaries coming into a relationship, meaning boundaries are for every relationship and interaction you have, right? So when you come into a relationship, I will hope you're having those conversations. You should already have an idea of what you like and what you don't like in regards, just generally, right? And then as you progress in a relationship, you might set new boundaries, because experience changes us, right? So I would say it's a little bit of both. It's when you get to know someone, you really want to get to know them and how they solve problems, and what do they think love is, and what is their idea of a good relationship. All of those, you already have the boundaries, whether you know how to communicate them or not. So it should be that. You should be coming in with some type of knowledge. Yeah, some type of knowledge of what you like and what you don't like. If you don't,
Got some work to do. Yeah,
you got some work. If you can't, if you don't have to know everything, but you should know generally. You should have some likes and dislikes, and then as you progress in a relationship, of course, boundaries change, things happen, situations change, but you should come in with some.
So you should obviously have done the work, I guess, beforehand, or at least even when you enter the relationship, doing the work at some point.
Yeah.
And would you say it's a shared responsibility between both parties? Because I think at times when people get into relationships, it's easy to point a finger and be like, "Oh, my partner is this, or my partner is that,"
Right.
and forget that there's work that you got to do on your own end. So I think that's important. That's one of the things that you just spoke about. Now, what does setting the right boundaries allow us to actually do? How does that allow us to function better? How do you see that play into our overall well-being?
Oh, it contributes to self-worth, how you make decisions, um, what you feel like you deserve. It contributes to just your overall health. Because when you feel heard and seen, and you feel like you have the ability to make yourself safe, overall, your overall wellness is going to be better. The thing about boundaries is, remember, it's about you making yourself feel safe, and you communicating with people what you desire, what your needs are. how you maintain your wellness. If you're always maintaining your wellness, your overall functioning is going to be better.
Mm.
And that's why I say everyone is responsible for their own boundaries. Now, when you're in relationships, whether it be sibling, parental, friendships, this is where communication and emotional intelligence come in. Be able to share with people. Don't just set your boundaries and don't let people know what they are until they cross them, right?
Right.
Don't say, oh, I set my boundaries in my head, and as soon as someone crosses them, we have to get into the habit of communicating with each other. We're getting there. We're getting there, but we have to openly communicate with each other and get to know each other on a deeper level. Like, what are your likes? What are your dislikes? Are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? And get to know each other. And hopefully, you won't have that problem of crossing boundaries. So everyone is responsible for their own boundaries. And we are responsible for communicating them with the people around us. So
I think the important word that you said there was communication. I think people often lack communication, they struggle with communication, or it just doesn't come naturally for them. And in the work that you've done with people, what do you find that people struggle with the most when they're setting those boundaries?
People being upset, if people are going to get mad at them. That is sorry. Oh, can you hear me? Can you just hear me?
You good.
Cool. People being upset with them. That is the number one issue or concern. I don't want to make people mad. And that could be a lot of things, but typically when we are concerned about being seen as rude or making people mad, it's a deeper issue. It's about how you see yourself and why you don't feel worthy of putting out what you need. So typically that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So would you say that's more of a self-esteem thing?
It could be self-esteem. It could be a childhood experience. It could be our perception. Because remember, culturally, some of our cultures say, you be quiet. You do not say what you want and need. You just take what you can get. So if I've been told that for 20 years, I don't just wake up on the 21st year and say, I would like, assertiveness is a skill.
Yeah,
so
right.
A lot of times culturally it's embedded in us. So we might want to speak up. We might want people to treat us better. We might want to make requests, but culturally we've been conditioned to, think something different. So if that's the case, you have to work at it. You have to, first of all, understand your culture. Understand what parts are cool for you, what parts are not. Understand that maybe being assertive is going to be different now that you have something that's different that you've learned. It might cause some issues. We go through all of that. But typically it's people not wanting other people to be mad at them. So we do some self-esteem work, but we do a lot of perception work. Like, what does that mean for you? And what do you think that means for the other person?
So I would say for the people that have a hard time, I guess dealing with people's perceptions of what their boundaries are or how they feel about their boundaries. How do you work them through that? Like, how do you work them through just saying, just know when you're setting these boundaries, like, people might feel a certain type of way. How do you prep them mentally to dealing with those type of things?
We talk a lot about what that means for them or what they think that means for other people. And when I work with clients, there's always an action item. There's always homework. I call it action item so I don't scare people, but it's homework. So whatever they're working on, they're gonna put it into action. So it's like, okay, if we're working on saying no, your action item is going to be this week. Let's see how this works and what are your expectations? What do you think is going to happen when you say no to mom? And they might say, oh, my mama gonna go off. And we say, okay, let's breathe through it.
Yeah.
Let's try it, right? And you put it in action. We just don't keep it in therapy because remember, you're in therapy 45 minutes a week or 45 minutes every 2 weeks. I'm more concerned about how you put it into action in the world. And what happens is they practice and they might say, I set my boundaries 3 times this month, and guess what? Nothing happened. Nobody, I wasn't disowned. I feel great. I was scared. Or they might say, yeah, I got a little pushback from my sister, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. Or sometimes they say, yeah, it went over like I thought it would. However, I'm glad I was able to do that because I feel good. And, I feel like it helped me. And I'm to the point where I would rather be mentally well versus not.
So
So put it to action.
Right. Putting it into action is the most important. Like I always
Right.
think about it in this way, like faith without works is dead. So like at the end of the day,
Right.
it's like you don't put that thing to work, then there's no point of being in counseling for 45 minutes, whatever the case may be. So I think that's important because a lot of people, they do struggle with whatever perceptions, whatever voice, whatever they think other people are going to say about them. And I think at the end of the day, you have to put yourself first. You have to put protecting your own energy at the forefront of trying to please everybody.
Which
And
is scary. I do want to point out it's very scary and it's not easy, but you definitely have to do that.
yeah. And this is more of a personal question. I just wanted to ask, like, what do you find to be the most gratifying aspect of the work that you get to do and how you get to serve God's people?
My answer used to be I get to help people. But now my answer for the last 2 years since I worked through the entire pandemic is being able to accept that I'm imperfect, like not just understanding that everyone is dealing with something.
Yeah.
Like not putting so much pressure on myself. Every day I'm more understanding and more patient. And sometimes I scare myself because I'll just be in normal life, not working. And I really have more patience for people and more grace. I'm much more gracious because I understand I don't know what everyone is going through. So let me present in a more gracious way versus in a more judgmental way. So I would 100% say that going through training as a therapist and as a mental health professional has made me a better person. And I like to tell people, when you see people in this field, please assume we are flawed. Don't assume we have it together.
Yeah.
Don't assume assume that we are just as flawed as you are. We just happen to put ourselves out there to try to, help someone else. But please believe in my training particularly, we had to do growth group. We had to do like group counseling, stuff like that. You learn more and more as you learn and more as you learn as you work. You're the most imperfect.
Right.
So I really embrace my flaws more every day.
That's a beautiful perspective. I think people are even more inspired by the way you deal with your imperfections as well. I think not trying to come off as like being this perfect individual or whatever. I think people gain more from that. They can relate more to that too. It's more real.
Right. I have to. I think every therapist goes through that stage where they either say, I'm not good enough. Who am I? Right. Who am I to help someone? And my family is not right. Or I feel like I need mental health support myself.
Yeah.
But then as you mature through your program and you start to develop as a clinician, I think most of us have that aha moment where we say, oh, yeah, that makes me an even better therapist.
Yeah.
I don't even have to carry that pressure. And if you are aware of the power dynamics in therapy, depending on what type of therapy you provide, I try to bring that into my sessions all the time, without disclosing too much. I always want to try to level the power dynamics because I don't ever want the clients to think I'm there to fix their problems or I'm above their problems. So yeah, it definitely helps. I don't pressure myself like I used to at all. I'm like, listen, I might not have the answer today, but I'm sitting in a space with somebody and I'm saving a life. So I'll take it.
No, that's beautiful. I like that. And if there was something that you could, because usually how we wrap up the show is leaving the people with one piece of advice. What would that be? What would that advice be for the people, the audience?
Oh, I think I said this before. First of all, You don't have to be strong.
Yeah.
I always tell people that if you coming from a place where you feel like you always have to be strong and being strong is a badge of honor. And when you have those moments of weaknesses, you might feel like, okay, so why am I not being strong? You don't have to be. And secondly, mental health is something you manage. I'm starting to hear a lot of people say this person has mental health or this person has, I have mental health. Mental health is not something you have. We all have a mental health status. It's something we manage. So if you are watching this, pay attention to when you feel good, not just when you don't feel well, because don't let mental health be a priority when something is going wrong. Incorporate it into your everyday life, something as small as stretching or deep breathing or just having a gratefulness journal, paying attention to your body, going to get a checkup. All of that is mental health because mental health is health. So don't look at it as something that you only pay attention to when it goes wrong. Manage it. Make sure it's ongoing because it's just like going to the gym. You have to get in shape. You have to manage your mental health. So when things do go wrong, because they will, life is full of changes. Don't disregard your mental and wait till something goes wrong and you're scrambling. Build that muscle. So I would like people to always remember that you manage your mental health. You don't fix it. You just manage it.
Consistency.
Gotcha.
And where can the people find you? What's your social media? Where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Tiesha Talk, TIESHATALK. You can visit my website at risebh.com, risebh.com to find, I have free workbook and all of that good stuff. If you want to work with me, you can find all of my information there.
Got you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Make sure you guys shoot her a follow. Whatever it is, the books that she has, purchase the books, whatever the case may be, anything that may help you. She has the resources on her page, so be sure to check that out as well. And I just want to thank you for joining me on today's show.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Most definitely.